Wallace Berman. Welcome to Tea with Tosh. Today our guest is the dancer, singer, actor, artist, the amazing Russ Tamblyn. Oh, amazing Russ Tamblyn. Do you feel amazing usually every day, or?
No.
Just a week?
More an amazed than amazing.
Okay, you've done West Side Story, which are famous, Tom Thumb, recently Human Highway, Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. Were you? Did you go with all seven brides?
Pardon?
Did you go with all seven brides?
No, just one. Just one of them.
Okay, so when you're a jet, are you always a jet?
Oh yes, there's no question about that. Can never get away from that. I even went to Puerto Rico for a premiere of another movie, and they booed me.
They booed you? Why?
Because I was the leader of the Jets.
Oh, Puerto Rico. Well, I'm glad you got out okay, though.
I got out okay. Always a jet.
Well, what I want to know is, when you discovered you weren't always a dancer, or do you consider yourself a dancer?
No, I didn't actually. I started out as a child actor. First movie I was in was with Dean Stockwell and the boy with green hair. Dean played the boy, and I was one of the kids. He was a child star, and I was a child actor.
And you worked with him recently on the Human Highway.
Yes, yes. We remained friends for well, since 1946 or 47. And I've spent the early part of my childhood acting in a lot of films. But it wasn't until Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, which was a very successful film, that my image sort of blossomed out, and I became known. A lot of people thought Seven Brides for Seven Brothers was my first movie. But I was not even a dancer at that time. I was actually an actor under contract to MGM, and they'd already started work on Seven Brides for Seven Brothers with four legitimate dancers. And then there was Howard Keel that just sang in the movie, and then the other two guys, it was an actor named Jeff Richards and myself that were actors just under contract to MGM. And they started rehearsals, and after about a week of rehearsals, Jeff and I went to visit our other brothers on the set that were dancers, and the choreographer, Michael Kidd, said, "I understand you can do flips," and I said, "Yeah, I was a gymnast." Did a couple of flips. He said, "Great, we'll put it in the number." And by the end of the musical, I was dancing. That was it. They said, "Hey, you're a dancer. Where have you been studying?"
Well, what is it like to be? What is it like to be under contract at MGM during those days?
It was wonderful. You know, looking back in retrospect now, it probably is sounds more exciting than it would be than it was at the time. It just seemed like the sort of normal. Average day. I went to school there the last couple of years of high school with Dean Stockwell and Elizabeth Taylor. It was a small little class.
Was she a good student?
She seemed to be a pretty good student. Very, very quiet, and worked a lot. She was always working. So she. They had a little schoolhouse on the lot, and then also when you were working, though, they would have a special teacher come and go on the set with you. So they have a little tent-like area where you'd sit and do your work at school.
Oh, well, do you have a choice of films you could? I mean, could you choose films on MGM, for instance?
No. When you're under contract, they would assign you to a film, and you had to do it. In fact, there were a couple of films that I turned down. That later on, I'm glad I did. One was called The Haunting. That was a very fine movie, and I actually turned that down.
Some people consider it the most scariest movie ever.
That's yes. A lot of people have said that.
I have a fear of breathing houses.
I don't like to run into too many of them either. I don't think anybody does. And that location, by the way, was a legitimate haunted house in England, in northern England, up near Stratford-on-Avon. They actually went to the house, a haunted house. There's some sort of society in England, and they went to the most haunted place that was haunted back to the 13th century.
Oh, so you actually filmed in a haunted house?
We filmed in a haunted house.
Wow. Did you see anything? I mean, was there anything?
I looked for ghosts. I never saw any. I felt a cold chill on the back of my neck one
night. I was just the cameraman.
I didn't want to see. I just left. Let somebody else look.
What's amazing, in your whole career, I mean, you work with everybody from Cecil DeMille to Neil Young, as a director, the musician.
Yeah.
That's quite an amazing spectrum. But you brought some stills. Maybe we can show them. I'd like to see the stills.
A few stills. We can put them on. This is from Samson and Delilah, which was my second movie when I was about 13, I believe, and that's Victor Mature. And I remember I had to run up and grab a hold of him, and I first grabbed his stomach, and Cecil DeMille said, no, don't do that, because his stomach wobbled too much. And it was supposed to be Samson. So
That's Samson, huh?
finally, I grabbed his belt. Right, I came up, I think I said, Samson, I've got my slingshot on my head, we can fight our way out, and he says something like, you know, get out of here, punk.
Okay, next deal.
That's George Brent, who was an old star back in the 40s, from a movie called The Kid from Cleveland.
How old were you?
About 14 there.
14?
Yeah, that was the next movie, I think, after Samson and Delilah.
Samson? Okay, next deal.
This is Father of the Bride. That's Spencer Tracy there, and I played Elizabeth Taylor's brother and the son of Joan Bennett, and later on her sister Constance Bennett, who was a big star at the time. I played her son in another movie. So in films, I ended up being my own first cousin.
You're always like in the same family, huh?
Yeah, that's right.
Next deal.
7 Brides for 7 Brothers.
Oh, that's you in action.
Me in action, jumping over an axe. And that's one of the times I made it. It actually took me about 30 takes to get this shot, because if you landed just slightly to the right or to the left, I'd hit that board and go flying off.
Okay, next deal.
And that's from a movie called Hit the Deck.
Uh-huh.
That's Tony Martin and Ann Miller in the center, and Vic Damone and Jane Powell over on the left, and myself with Debbie Reynolds, which I always thought this was one of the last of the big MGM
musicals,
with cannon shooting off and all that. And that's from Peyton Place. That's Diane Varsi and myself, and this was the film that I got nominated for an Academy Award for supporting actor in, which I brought tonight.
Oh, great. Okay, next deal, please.
And that's from West Side Story. Leader of the Jets. When you're the Jet all the way, from your first cigarette to your last dying day. Yeah, I still remember that.
Right. And is there a still after this?
I think so.
Oh, I know that gentleman. That's Mr. Fred Astaire.
Yeah, that's Fred Astaire, and this was at a gathering with a bunch of dancers for a film called That's Dancing. And on this particular day, Fred could barely move his neck, and I asked him what was wrong with it. He had a brace underneath his collar there. And he told me that he had slipped and fallen down the week before. And I said, well, it's about time.
Well, I'm sure he'll do another musical. I mean, it looks pretty good to
Oh,
me. He's going to go. So, but what I'm interested, how was it working with Cecil B. DeMille?
Oh, DeMille was fabulous looking back now. I remember that one thing I remember about him was that there were 2 guys who walked around with him all the time. One had a microphone, and wherever DeMille went, he would hold the mic in front of him, and there was another guy that walked behind him with a chair. And anytime DeMille wanted, he would just sit down on the set, and the chair better be there. It was always there. I'd love to have seen it sometime if the guy was
no chair.
Right, if there was no chair, I'm sure he wouldn't last long.
But did he wear like boots and?
Yes, he wore boots, and he had a great eye for he'd look at a crowd of 1,000 people. I remember. I don't know if he did it on purpose or if it was really his eye, but sometimes he would look up and say, "That man up there in the 34th row, 16th seat over, the one in the red thing, change places with a guy next to you." You know.
Was he a dictator on the set?
He was very much in control. Also, in that scene when I ran up to Samson, and I remember he actually made me cry. I remember that the camera was over here, and I remember when I came up to Samson, I held my hand up and said, "I've got my slingshot on my head," and he came over and he grabbed my hand. I remember and said, "Point here, not here," and he was banging my head with my hand. I was very upset, but
I could imagine. And I heard rumors that you were good friends of Queen Elizabeth. England's very
well,
famous.
I wouldn't say real close friends, but I did manage to meet her a couple of times, actually. Second time, when she said, "Haven't we met before?" I said, "I don't think so." Actually, I did have one experience, though, with her at the premiere of West Side Story. It was a Royal Command performance, and I got to sit up in the royal box right behind Queen Elizabeth, in fact, in the row right behind her, and Peter Sellers was sitting next to me. Most stories about celebrities and people are fairly boring, but this happened to be an interesting one. And Peter Sellers actually was a very quiet man who very seldom said anything. He was very quiet, except when he was working, and then he would get into his character. But he was sitting next to me, and the movie started, West Side Story. The lights went out, and the curtains started to open, and they were doing the opening shots of West Side Story. And just as the curtains were opening, Sellers leaned forward and said, "Hey, lady, would you mind taking your crown off?" I'll never forget that. And he sat back. I was totally shocked, and I was looking at the Queen, and she didn't budge.
You can't get arrested for saying that to the Queen?
I asked him later. I said, "How could you say that to the Queen?" He said, "Oh, she'll laugh about it later at the palace." You know.
He has a lot of nerve.
In public, doesn't blink.
That's great. Well, tell us a little bit about West Side Story. Like, how did that come about?
Well, West Side Story, I was under contract at MGM, and went over and tested for the other part, for the lead in it, for Tony.
Oh, really?
And they offered me the part of Riff, the leader of the Jets, so I did it. Worked on the film for over a year.
And there's a lot of famous dancers in that film, isn't there? Like part of the Jets.
David Winters, who did a lot of directing and choreography afterwards, and Tony Mordente, who did a lot, and Elliot Feld, who has his own ballet
dance
company.
troupe. Yeah.
Quite a few.
And what is your, okay, now jumping from West Side Story to Neil Young, what is your working relationship with Neil Young?
Let's see, we started out back in the 60s. Neil lived next door to me up in Topanga, in my early Topanga days. And we were going to do a film then that Dean Stockwell had written called After the Gold Rush.
Which is was a famous Neil Young album.
Yeah, and Neil wrote the music for the movie and put out the album. The movie never got made, but the album got made, and After the Gold Rush is probably one of Neil's famous, very successful albums. But the film never got made, and later on, many years later, a few years ago in fact, Neil decided he wanted to make another film. So Dean and myself and Neil got together and co-wrote the script, and I choreographed a dance number in it and also acted in it. And we made it, and it's being edited now. I think more for video release than any kind of major motion picture.
And Devo's in this too.
Devo is in it, Dennis Hopper.
Dennis Hopper.
It was quite a movie. I think it was more fun than I've ever had.
What is the film about? What's the subject matter?
Human Highway? Well, it's a nuclear comedy.
Laughing matter with
up.
me. And is it a full musical? Is there dancing? And
it's changed a lot. No, there's only one dance number in it, but there are a couple of musical numbers with Neil singing and also playing with Devo, doing both of their songs. It's sort of a light comedy, rock and roll, off the wall type of movie. That wasn't made for any commercial reasons. It was actually like a work of love, I think. I don't remember any bad times on it. It was all just a lot of fun and doing what we wanted to do. We ad-libbed a lot of it. In fact, the rule was that there be no rule. That was the plan. The plan was no plan.
Sort of like a Marx Brothers routine.
Actually, I think the Marx Brothers, worked out stuff a lot. I think that they actually had more routine going. We always tried to fool each other, pull surprises in the middle of a take.
But have you worked with? I think in Billboard, did some work with Neil Young on a recent video?
Yes, and I just choreographed a video for him called "People on the Street" that's I think playing now on MTV.
Oh, really?
I choreographed it and I danced in it. There were 3 dancers in it. We danced behind him, and then also I was Neil's feet. There's
Neil's feet.
There's shots of him moving up.
Yeah, it looks like Neil's feet to me.
Shoot him from the waist down, and that's my feet swinging away.
More tea?
Yes, that's delicious tea,
Would
too.
you want some more?
I certainly do.
Yeah, it's made in 1922, this special
no kidding, is that
Korean
old?
tea.
Is it still good after all those years?
I kept it in the refrigerator for a couple decades. It's okay.
Well, it tastes all right. If I get sick later, I'll let you know.
Well, of all the films you've done, what is your favorite? Which one do you
I have
you
different
like
favorites for different reasons, I mean, I would probably, the biggest, for lots of different reasons, Benny Peyton Place because I got nominated for an award, West Side Story, so I always loved that, from the stage show and always wanted to do it. I did a movie called The Long Ships that was a great film because of the location. We went to Yugoslavia and it was a fabulous location. I don't know how good the movie was. And Tom Thumb because of the science fiction side of it and working with George Pell.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, there's a big George Pell cult now. I mean, you see a lot of retrospectives.
Yeah, in fact, I did a documentary on him, which was an incredible documentary. I even learned a lot about him.
How's it like working with somebody like George Pell?
Extremely interesting. I mean, he was just a beautiful, innocent man who had a little mischievous grin on his face and loved animation and Neil Young. There's a lot of Neil Young that reminds me of George.
Really?
Neil got it in Human Highway. Did some animation, a lot of animation stuff that he liked doing, liked filming that, and remind me a lot of.
So like in Tom Thumb.
I mean, can you imagine Neil Young being related to George Pell?
Or Cecil DeMille.
This goes to show you, yeah.
Well, the sets in Tom Thumb, on the sets, were like, they're actually like big tables?
They were all giant, yeah, they were giant sets. They did it about 3 different ways. They filmed it. They filmed it with a little doll at sometimes when a hand grabbed it. And other times they would film a little section. They could make, for instance, if they were filming this table, they would take a corner of it, they take this whole, like a section of it, and make that a giant set. And then you could film the whole table with the phone and everything, and there would be that section. So I could actually add, you know, as long as I stayed on the section, I could move the cup, and it looked like the whole thing was giant, but it was actually just a little section of the set that was big.
What was it like working with Spencer Tracy? He's like one of my faves.
Oh, he was wonderful. You know, he was just a great actor. I just remember looking at him a lot and admiring him, and he was one of the big stars that I certainly knew about in my early days.
Was he like helpful on the set at all? I mean, is he like helpful towards like helping other actors?
He was, yeah, he was helpful. He was into his own thing a lot, and I remember that he used to complain about not. What are we doing today? You know, what scene are we doing today? And like he didn't know what he was doing, and he'd get you all nervous, and then he'd get into the scene and rattle everything off, and he knew exactly what he was doing.
So you have any dirt on Katharine Hepburn and him? I mean, did you?
No.
Oh. Okay, now interesting. Okay, now I mentioned introduction that you're also an artist.
That's true.
Yes, a very good artist, I might add. And we have some slides of some of your artwork.
Oh. Okay,
so the first slide.
Oh yeah, this was a collage that I did in the early '70s, I believe this one was done. No meaning to it. It was just I liked the way things fit sometimes.
Do you title any of your work?
I don't think I did, but we can title it if you want. Big Mouth.
Big Mouth sounds good. Next slide.
And this was just a bird coming out of a crowd. I think it was a statue of a bunch of Italians going up a statue, and I stuck a bird on it.
Oh, okay. Next slide.
Mushroom.
Exotic.
Another one.
What year was this done about?
This was done, I think, in the late '60s, early '70s.
Okay, next slide.
And this was the beginning. It was actually your father, Wallace, that turned me onto art. And when he passed away, I wrote a big W on a big piece of cardboard. And this was actually the beginning of a series called Planets. And this was the first piece, and the only one that wasn't a circle.
Circle? The next one will be Planet Pieces. Next slide, I think.
Well, this will show you just the size of the planets, but go on to the next one.
Okay, next slide.
And then you'll see, I want you to see the sizes. They were all different colors. Now, since this is a black and white monitor, I can't even, I think this is a white one, the first one. Those are all little pieces of paper that look like paint. And I actually used to cut out little pieces of, paper out of magazines that had a lot of texture in it. And then I piled them up onto layers, different layers of cardboard in different colors.
So in a sense, it's sort of like painting, but it's done with paper?
Yeah, that's right. Instead of having a palette of paint, I'd have a palette of pieces of paper. White, and that's black and white, right? Gives you an idea. Want to go on to the next one?
Yeah, next one.
And I sort of had a similarity. I started the light up in the right-hand corners. You can see to give it a circular effect. I don't know what color this is. But they're all different. I did different colors on each one, and would glue all these little pieces of paper on until I would go crazy.
Did you go crazy?
Oh,
Did you
yeah.
go crazy?
Oh, sometimes I would glue the wrong side of the piece of paper down, and it really didn't matter.
They're beautiful pieces.
Thank you. It was a nice show to see them all together.
Why planets? Why did you choose that form, the image of a planet or a star?
Well, I don't know. I actually would take microscopic shots. I think that's the last one that was a multicolored planet, and which Dennis Hopper bought from me, by the way. I didn't originally call them planets. I liked working with circles and liked working with colors. It started out as an experiment of just separating little pieces of paper and gluing them down.
Well,
They look like planets. I always thought of it as planets because I used to work a lot with microscopic shots out of science magazines, and I would take scientific microscopic shots of diseases a lot of times, and it always looked like landscape to me. So I would take it out of that microscopic scene and make a landscape out of it. And usually, sometimes in the bigger collages, I would use maybe one piece of reality, like a river. In those pieces, I didn't. They were all little microscopic shots. Usually, some disease that I would.
So, what is the most beautiful disease you've seen?
Well, the most beautiful disease that I've seen. Let's see. There is one, cholera. Actually, I did.
My favorite.
Yeah, I did a piece called "Hot Under the Cholera." And,
Hot Under the Cholera.
And that was one that I liked in particular.
So there's a period where you sort of stopped working in films and sort of got into art. You sort of concentrated on artworks. Okay.
Yes, I did. I think that the difference. They're both art. One is the performing arts, which covers theater and films, and where you actually perform for people and do whatever you can to make the audience's head spin. Sometimes you don't like what you're doing, especially dancing a lot of times, because the whole thing with dancing is you can be out of breath sometimes, you know, and you try and make it look easy, and you're going, you feel like that, but you're going, this is fun, look at this, I'm having a great time, and really you're working your tail off, you know, trying to make everybody think, God, he's having a great time, and isn't that wonderful? Now that's in the performing arts, is you try and make the audience's head spin. Now in the fine arts, you try and make your own head spin. You keep working, and you don't care what anybody thinks. And it doesn't matter, actually. I find if I'm doing theater now or films, I'm really curious to know what someone thought of it. But in art, I don't care what anyone thought. Particularly, I mean, they're what they thought. I'm interested, but it doesn't affect me if they say I liked it or I didn't like it or I understood it or didn't. It doesn't matter because I did what I wanted to do. It was for my head, not for anybody else.
So in other words, when you do like films, or you do a lot of stage work too. I mean, you've done
a lot of theater. Yes, I've been doing quite a bit. I just did The Music Man,
which I saw. It was great.
Oh, that's right. You can
it was great. Let's think. How long does it take for you to put like a music number together, either on film, for instance?
Well, I start working fairly early, especially in theater, and not so much in films because you can always cut. You know, if you forget your lines, you can always cut and do it again from another angle or something. But on the stage, you better know what you're doing. So I like to start early. You don't have to. You don't need any more than 2-3 weeks probably really to do it. But I like to start like 2 or 3 months and start memorizing and learning and getting into shape so that by the time it gets around to rehearsals, which you usually only have like a week or 2 weeks of rehearsal, which is the time that you learn the staging, I like to have everything else covered. So I know all the lines, know the songs, know the singing, and I'm in shape to learn the dance steps.
All right. Well, you brought one of your. What did you bring there?
Yes, I brought one of my pieces that I thought would cover both entertainment and art. And this particular piece is an Academy Award nomination, the one that I got for Peyton Place. And I actually took this piece. How can you see it? So it's not too much light. Anyway, this is an Academy Award nomination that I actually, when I received it, I kept it around for several years, and then I threw it up on my roof in Topanga and left it up on the roof for maybe 2 or 3 years. And as you can see, it started to peel and looks like it's fragile. You know, down in corners, it looks like it's ready to fall apart. But actually, that stiff plastic that you could leave up there for 10 years, and it just was. It took it 3 years just to start to peel. Most things would have faded by then. So it's well covered.
Didn't you do like a series of artworks? Your house burned down in Topanga. Correct?
Yes.
And you just used some of the material from your burnt house to make art pieces?
Yeah, I did a whole fire series that I got interested in the walls and actually in charcoal where the fire had hit the ceiling. and hit it really hard and burnt, but didn't go all the way through. It shot out the windows. And that stuff, so it had like a hard backing to it, and the front part was maybe like a half an inch of hardwood and a half an inch of black charcoal. And I found that I could carve in it very easily and then paint it. I had a lot of fun.
That's like taking something, you know, a negative incident and making it positive.
Yeah, that's what I got out of it too. It was, you know, rising from the ashes or any of those cliches, but I don't see any reason. It's no different than George Herm's using junk art to put it on another level. I
and
think
it's a very personal level.
What it does.
Well, anyway, we're out of time, I'm afraid.
Oh.
So, Russell, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tosh. It was a great pleasure.
Maybe do like a small version of West Side Story on the stage.
Certainly, I can still do this. Oh my God, I forgot. Next time.
Next time.
I'll practice.
Adios, amigos, amiguettes. Bye-bye. Thank you.